Okay, hello and welcome everyone to our little chat here called Citizen City 2040. So we're having a discussion today all around a hopeful, more positive look to the future of our cities. We're talking about sustainability and transport and citizen engagement mostly, and we have some really amazing speakers with us. And just for those of you that maybe don't know a bit about Connect the Dots, we specialize in stakeholder engagement for developing cities, designing policy, and it's really all about equity and sustainability. Ultimately, they're the types of projects that we focus on. Yeah, so I'm obviously based in Dublin. I head up our office here, and Kirsten is zooming in from Philadelphia. So I might pass back over to you, Kirsten.
Sure, thanks. So my name's Kirsten. I'm the manager of strategic planning and design on the US side. We do a lot of similar projects to the Irish side, but we focus a bit more here on comp plans. We often work with CDCs and bids, and we're doing a few thought leadership pieces on both sides right now, actually. So I'm going to throw it over to the speakers. I want to introduce Emma Cairns. She's from Chambers, Ireland. And Rob Studeville, he is at the Congress for New Urbanism. So it would be so great if you could both say a bit about yourself. Emma, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, no problem at all. So yeah, as Christian said, my name is Emma Cairns. I'm head of policy and public affairs with Chambers Ireland. So for the audiences on both sides of the Atlantic, that's the National Chamber of Commerce. We have 40 member chambers, including our five big city chambers, but then our town and regional and county chambers right across the island. And I suppose in terms of breadth of that network, that's about 8,000, 9,000 businesses and 1.5 million employees. So significant. We're all about place. That's what's really important to us. And we're all about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is right there in the background. And we use that as a framework for how we think about policy and how we think about economic development and how we think about how we invest in the places that our chambers are operating in, how we create those jobs and how we sustain the Irish economy. That's my little blurb for Chambers Ireland. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about our work right throughout this conversation.
Thanks, Emma. Rob, I'll throw it over to you.
Yes, and as you said, I'm from the Congress for the New Urbanism, which is a membership organization in the United States. We actually have international members as well, and we were founded in 1993, basically to come up with a different idea for sprawl, because sprawl at that time was the only way that we were developing. It's the real estate economy is maybe about a third of the overall national economy. It's huge, but there were everything was being built in these segregated pods, and so a group of architects and developers and planners thought they had a different idea for how to build, and they've been trying to promote that idea. They're mainly private sector. There's a growing number of public sector members, and they've had quite a bit of influence in terms of how we built cities and towns across America over the last 3 decades.
Cool.
So our first question, our first thing we wanted to thrash around was our hope or our vision for the future. So we're looking for the good news here. I suppose we're looking for any interesting trends you're starting to see that's come out of COVID. We're well aware of all the quite negative effects. And I suppose it's just, we wanted to be able to talk through some of the more positive things, I suppose. So maybe if you want to keep going, Rob, with any ideas first.
Yeah, I think that COVID is a little bit, it's a little unclear as to what the impacts are going to have, and obviously there are going to be some negative impacts on cities. But I think there are also some positive trends that have been happening over the last 2 decades for cities, and those positive trends are ultimately, I think, going to prevail over time, because these are the long-term trends, and we are seeing some very positive things happen for cities, for the built environment in general. And one thing that came out recently was an analysis of street networks in in metropolitan areas around the country. And what they found was that that there has been a return to the sort of compact, walkable street networks over the last 2 decades. For the second half of the 20th century, it was all about building these sprawling, disconnected networks, and that was really what was the essence of sprawl. And so there, all those compact cities that we had prior to 1950, they became these spread out, sprawling cities that you see today. But since the year 2000, due to trends like the new urbanism, we've seen a return to these walkable street networks. I think ultimately that's going to continue because there's a strong market for living in walkable neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. Like going back to what we had really is the future. But
Yes.
I think that kind of relates to that 15-minute city idea, Emma, that you...
Yeah, absolutely. I've literally just come off a webinar with our chamber network and was on this notion of just transition for regions. And we had a town planner, an urban designer from Cork County Council with us. And she was talking a lot about the 15-minute city, or 10-minute town, as they're talking about in the Southern Regional Assembly. And it's not a new idea. Like, that's how towns were supposed to be designed. They're meant to be people focused. In terms of my own sense of the city agenda in Ireland, we're not very good at the city agenda in Ireland, and we're very good or bad at sprawl in many ways. Notes of optimism though, and this is going, a couple of years before COVID, we have a new national planning framework, and within that there's a commitment to 5 city regions, and this notion that cities are sort of centres of growth and that they'll drive that regional growth throughout. And across our own chamber network, the importance of towns is really important. And within the Programme for Government in Ireland, there is a commitment to a town centre first approach, which is modelled on the Scottish Town Centre First programme. And we've been feeding into that strategy and having conversations with officials. And why that's important to us is that urban spaces, towns, cities, they're really important to the sustainability agenda. They're really good for economies, they're really good for local economies, but they have an awful lot of challenges. And COVID heightened all of those challenges. So everything from vacancies to how we use space. Certainly a lot of our chambers were really engaged in their local and regional conversations around active mobility and healthy streets and bike lanes and pedestrian friendly city centres. That has become essential when we look at, maybe in Ireland now, we're just out of what we're calling level 5 in terms of our COVID-19 restrictions, and the big focus is how do you make towns and city centres safe for people, because during a pandemic people need lots of space. And our towns and cities haven't necessarily evolved in that way. And then the ones that are lucky enough to have pedestrianised places are, in a little bit of a better position for their retail and hospitality, because there is that more space for people. So I'm very hopeful that legacy, that will be a legacy from COVID-19, in that we make cities and towns more people friendly and places for people. And like, from a business perspective, if there's people in the places, they're spending money, which is what our members want to see. And there's a huge business case for that. People are living in a town or city, they're working in that town or city more than likely, and they're spending in that town or city, and then we've got healthy, sustainable local economies. So I'm very hopeful, but I think I would stress the important, and I wouldn't underestimate the challenge that's going to be going forward. We see this sort of very polarized kind of conversation, not just in Ireland, I'm sure it's exactly the same in the States, where it's like we must flee the cities during COVID-19 and cities are no longer safe. That isn't true, and that can't be true. So we need to make sure that we make our cities better for people, that we take the opportunities to redesign, to take back space, to kind of make our city centres more hospitable to businesses and to the consumers and people who live in those places as well. So it's very important in Ireland. It's very necessary. It is part of our future plans and the government's future plans for the economy, but it's no easy task either. So we're really, really hopeful that we get that support and that people realise how important it is to advance and make progress.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice segue. I said I wouldn't talk too much, obviously, during this chat, but I know from myself and Kirsten's perspective, I suppose our hope is that the challenges that have sprung up through COVID in terms of citizen engagement have actually become really interesting opportunities, where people are trying to get very creative and make sure that they do reach people that maybe aren't online all the time, or, people that just getting more creative with the delivery method and with the engagement methods, and using things like, and it's interesting going back to the old ways of doing things, like using a postal system, using snail mail basically, and using shop fronts and letterboxes, and you know what I mean, all the kind of older ways that you would have got your message out there now are, it's even more important, and there's been a huge kind of push now to do that more, which has been really refreshing. And there's also been a push obviously to do everything online as well, in terms of virtual rooms and webinars, and that is all grand and everything, but you still have to think about the whole picture. And this was what you were mentioning, was maybe more the kind of high level engagement, or that cities are for people, and then I suppose our work tends to trickle down to the on the ground, that look like in an area when a bike lane goes in, and something that I've been thinking about is just how in Ireland especially we kind of rushed to do a lot of that, and while it's amazing for the sustainable development goals, and it gives people more sustainable options with transport, what does it do for people with disabilities? What does it do for people with buggies? What does it do for people, so there's all these negotiations that have to take place, but I feel hopeful, and I don't know if Kirsten has anything to add to that, but I definitely feel hopeful that people are really taking it way more seriously to speak to people and listen to people about these issues.
Well, so one thing, I was talking to someone at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I was asking about, is this the right time to do these massive street overhauls? Should we be studying the lower traffic flow and seeing where to put in a bike lane? And she said, you have to be really careful whether you're being opportunistic or strategic. If you're being opportunistic, it means you're taking advantage of a situation, and that may have negative consequences down the line, because you're not considering all those factors like vulnerable populations, or what traffic flow might look like when things come back to normal. But if you're being strategic, then obviously you're taking those things into account, and this is a really good time to be strategic given kind of new inputs and new data. So that's been something that's been on my mind quite a bit.
Absolutely.
One of the positive things is the experimentation that's going on, that people are doing things quickly, and these are temporary changes, so they can always be changed back. But at least people are trying things that are different. I think these changes in streets would take so long, often take 5-7 years of planning before you can change a street. And what we're finding in COVID is, if there is a strong enough incentive, you can actually change a street in a day, and put something new in. And maybe it doesn't work, maybe it does work, but I think the experimentation is very good. And ultimately, people are going to find out a lot from the changes that are being made in the streets during this pandemic.
And I think it's one way of testing it out. It's one way to just throw it in there and then see what happens and then iterate.
Absolutely, and I think we've seen a lot of that in Ireland as well, Rob, with in terms of those temporary trials, particularly during the summer, where we would have maybe pedestrianised a few streets in a few different towns, or put in a bike lane, or temporarily extended a footpath, putting in some bollards just to give people that bit more room. And I think that, Kirsten, you just hit the nail on the head. Like, we're always very conscious of, just because you want something to happen, don't exploit it. Don't take a crisis to kind of further an agenda. It can be the fastest way, but will you polarize people while you're doing it? But trialing systems is a way to help people visualize what it would be like and to identify problems. And I don't think we need to be maybe shy about kind of agreeing that more sustainable mobility, more bike lanes, wider footpaths, more pedestrian spaces is probably good for cities and towns, and we do want that to happen. It's just, how do you do it in a way that brings people with you? And if there's one thing I know from, I've been working with the chambers and the business community for several years, is business typically doesn't like uncertainty, and not that they don't like change, but when change is very uncertain, they're a bit wary of it. So yeah, like that engagement is really important to get, so that you bring people with you and that you're making a case that they can see and understand. And then typically when they see the value of it, you know, they don't go back. You know, they pedestrianised Shop Street in Galway back in the early 90s. And, you know, that's something that's often talked about in Ireland is it rains so much. How could you have, you know, pedestrianisation or any of these things? You're like, well, if they can do it in Galway, they can do it anywhere. So that's, yeah, that I think, you know, those examples and those case studies are going to be really important to encourage people to kind of think maybe a little bit differently about what cities could look like and what towns could look like.
Definitely. I think you've hit on exactly the point that I was going to make around just that there's this whole other, we've discussed it briefly about like the engineers and the planners and the architects all kind of needing to push us forward and make better spaces for people. But what about the engagement piece, and what about the people that are living in those spaces? And I don't know, Rob, if you had any thoughts around the importance of consultation yourself from your own.
Absolutely. And you know, it's to have good engagement is critically important. You can't really get anything done in the long term that is effective without good engagement. And the new urbanism has really, you know, been focused on public engagement right from the beginning, and was very pioneering in the idea of the planning charrette, which you know, which more intensive public engagement over a shorter period of time, trying to get everybody to the table. This idea has, of course, evolved over the years, but you know, this COVID has really changed everything, because it used to be a face-to-face engagement, and now people are scrambling to try to figure out how to do these meetings by Zoom. I think it's been good in some ways, because we have you know, figured out a lot of different, you know, had to be creative, had to be innovative. I think ultimately, you know, we need to get back to the face-to-face engagement when this pandemic is over, because I don't think Zoom really takes the place of people meeting face-to-face. But all these new tools in the toolbox are effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. You can't beat the kind of the chats over coffee with real people. But I also think, like, let's not underestimate, like, you know, we're on both sides of the Atlantic and we're getting to facilitate this conversation. Just the use of technology and having those conversations and consulting people. What I'm always conscious of is, you know, making the case for a consultation as well. Like, certainly, whether it's a local authority or a developer or a chamber, whoever, you know, and they want to get a project over the line and they just want to get it done. The best way of getting it done even takes a little bit longer is to bring people with you, and not to be afraid of people. And chambers and our members are often, you know, they're on the ground locally, and they're often at that intersection between people who might want to get things done, whether that might be government or the local government or local authorities or state agencies, and then their members and the communities that are around them, and trying to bridge that gap. You learn a lot from people. You learn about the things you need to fix. You learn about the hiccups that could cost you an awful lot of money or time down the road when you're trying to build something later on that maybe wouldn't have if you'd known about it early on. And when people are bought into something, and it's like that social acceptance piece or social license, it's more sustainable as you're developing and changing. And I think what COVID-19 and never even showing us, I suppose, in a very immediate, real, visible way, but I think climate action maybe in a slightly more intangible, medium, long-term way, is that everything is changing. You know, the climate is changing, weather is changing. That's going to have big impacts for where we live and how we live. As I mentioned just a bit earlier on, kind of more urban places and more cities are part of the solutions to climate change as well. And that, you know, if you can, it's easier to build the right transport, to build the right buildings in more dense locations. So how do you support that evolution of thought, particularly in a place like Ireland where we're quite rural, really still? And we've a lot of scattering of small towns across the country, but we're not that urban or city focused just yet. And that's a change for people too.
That reminds me of something I'd really love to hear a little more from Rob about, which is how things are changing for transportation in cities kind of before, during, and after COVID. What kind of trends are you seeing in terms of what are the hopes for urban transportation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I wanted to just add on to something Emma said, but it's also urbanism should be thought of, in my view, as not just big cities, but also small cities, medium-sized cities, and even towns, even small towns are, walkable urban places. And those kinds of places can be supported by urban policies as well. And the main streets that we have all across America, and in places, I'm sure, like Ireland. But the transportation trends, we're seeing great changes in transportation with the micromobility, the shared networks, changes in technology, as well as a rethinking of how we get around. I mean, for a long time, we were really focusing on how do you build a street for an X number of cars, and getting an X number of cars through was how transportation engineers mainly thought in terms of car capacity, and thinking in terms of people capacity. And now really all these different types of mobility that we're seeing. I think they're quite supportive of cities and walkable places ultimately, especially if they're shared, these new shared technologies, because you can get rid of a lot of the parking spaces that were taking up much of our downtowns, and start to rebuild places that for businesses and people to live, and other functions that downtowns used to have.
And yesterday when we were chatting, you mentioned sort of a move away from highways.
Yeah, that has been one of the more successful endeavors of CNU. And we came up with this idea of freeways without futures about 12 years ago, and started to make a list of freeways around the country that we thought should be taken down. And replaced, with just the city again, the street network, boulevard. And that list kind of became very popular, and we got a lot of attention from that. And this movement has grown now. And we're seeing like cities in my area, in upstate New York, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, are all taking down highways that were disrupting the center of their towns, cutting the downtowns from neighborhoods, cutting people off from jobs and other opportunities. And this is a really positive trend. There are a couple of bills that will be, I believe, considered before Congress next year that are going to have pilot money for taking down highways and converting highways to boulevards.
Wow, that's amazing. That feels like total inspiration, Emma. What we could do here in Ireland, make a list of like a bad list, a naughty list.
Like, still very attached to our road network in Ireland, but what I was just thinking of there is, as both Kirsten and Rob were speaking, was I suppose maybe we need to do more to dispel the myth that more active transport is somehow less inclusive. So when, often you see the kind of conversations about whether bike lanes are good for cities, and suddenly it comes to, what about people with disabilities, or what about older people? Cities that maybe are pedestrian first and cycle friendly, but certainly active transport friendly, that maybe have less cars and less motorized streets, tend to be far more inclusive for older people, for people with disabilities, particularly in terms of wider footpaths and just slower movement. And it tends to be a lot more open to that. I read this really interesting article a couple of years ago. I think actually, sorry, I said a couple of years ago, it was earlier this year. But it was on, the dearth of female town planners, and the fact that, you know, so many of the decisions about the size of footpaths and the way lanes or tunnels are made, or lots of different things you see in town city centres, just aren't very family friendly or female friendly, even in terms of the size of a footpath for like a buggy, and whether or not that would be big enough for that. So I think part of that social acceptance piece and part of that consultation piece is that towns and cities that are more pedestrianised and have more bike lanes and are more suited to kind of active mobility, are just, if not more inclusive than the ones that have lots of parking and lots of cars. So I think that's maybe something that ends up on either side of a polarized spectrum, but actually maybe it's just a bit of a false narrative. So I'd love to see more conversation about that in terms of town and city spaces actually being better for like age-friendly communities, family-friendly communities, and more inclusive for people with disabilities as well.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. I don't want to keep us on too much longer. One thing I meant to say at the start was that both Rob and Emma are wells of knowledge and information and have plenty of case studies, I'm sure, in their brains of all the stuff we've been talking about. So I will leave their contact details or website into the description of this video and send it out to whoever signed up to receive notifications about these chats. The last thing I wanted to ask, or maybe the second last thing, was something that we kind of touched on in our chats previous to this, but I think there are some really interesting insights around. So sharing your expertise. So what is something that is common knowledge in your practice or to you that you wish everyone knew about? So who wants to go first?
I'll after you. You're up early.
Well, I would say the importance of the built environment. I mean, I think that a lot of people take it for granted. They just sort of are going their day-to-day, living their day-to-day lives, and whether it's in a sprawling place where they have to drive everywhere, or whether they go to work in a main street or something, they don't realize that the consequences of the built environment have on your daily life. They really determine a lot of your choices. And it's not by chance. I think people look at, sort of a commercial strip with lots of big box stores, and they think, oh, this place is not very well planned or not planned. But in fact, it's planned to every last detail. And there are codes in place that allow everything to be built the way it is. And people are not aware of those codes. If you make those codes better, you can make the built environment better.
Wow. I love that.
Would you maybe have a suggestion for someone who is new to this field, but maybe notices themselves being uncomfortable in a certain environment? It can be hard to kind of pick up on what those clues are, but once you know that you don't feel comfortable in a space, you then need to learn the language of that discomfort. Like, is it a trash collection problem? Is it a scale problem? Is it because, everything looks exactly the same like it would in a strip mall? Or, I don't feel safe as a pedestrian here. How do people start to kind of learn that language and then ask for things to be better? I know that's a loaded question. It's a lot, but.
Who are you asking?
Rob.
Oh.
All of you, Rob.
Yeah, I'm up to you if you'd like to weigh in.
I think that people, first of all, just need to start looking and noticing what's around them, and figuring out, what makes the environment work better, what makes it not work so well, and maybe start to become aware of urban places, of the way the community is formed. I think it's a wonderful aspect of our culture that people are not aware of. It's like music, kind of. The architecture and the planning of our communities is such a wonderful part of our culture, and it affects our daily lives. Start to learn about that, and maybe you can start to affect change.
Yeah, I think there's something funny about that. Like, that just resonates with me with a session I did years ago with these young kids. They were like in, I don't know, like maybe transition years. So I don't know what that is, like 16 years old, say, maybe a bit younger. And I was trying to explain to them this idea, Robert, this idea of like being aware of your surroundings, that there were decisions made by people that were voted on by us. You know what I mean? There's a whole ecosystem of decision making that happens as to why you land at a certain space, like you're saying. And that was kind of what I was saying to the kids, like, do you ever look up at the buildings, for example? Do you ever consider the shadow and the height and the, and they were just looking at me like totally like I had 10 heads. But because I do think Kirsten, right, like there's a whole vocabulary around, first of all, just getting people to be aware. And because I do a bit of meditation, it also reminds me of that. Just being aware of your emotions and aware of everything. That's anyway,
that's really interesting. Knowing, Kirsten, I might just jump in just to follow Rob on that. Just something that occurred to me as you were all speaking is, I suppose, asking why things are a certain way. So we talked a little bit about kind of engagement and consultation, when it might be public officials or local government looking for insights ahead of something. But that works the other way around as well. So people should be more engaged with what's going on around them. And quite often politicians or local officials or councillors might only hear when people are against something. They never hear when people are for something, or when people have a creative idea of, well, why is that gate closed at those hours? Or why isn't there more street lighting in certain parts of the city or in a park? Or why isn't there better access or wider footpaths? And could we do something about that? So usually politicians only engage or only hear from the naysayers, and that's why they tend to listen. Whereas, if I had a message to anyone listening in, it's, if you see something that could be fixed or that could be different, or you're just wondering why, ask and engage in that way. And suppose, Naomi, to your question, what's one thing I wish more people knew? Something that our chambers are really conscious of, whether it's Dublin City Chamber or Cork Chamber or some of our town chambers, maybe in Ennis and Tralee, is that town centres that are more pedestrianised or that have more active transport tend to be better for business. There's a lot of research done that cyclists or pedestrians spend more money than those who were in cars, and that is good for business. And that's something we all know in the chamber network. But it would be great if maybe that was known more widely in the business community, that it's not something we need to be afraid of. Definitely people are afraid, quite legitimately, like, I understand where they're coming from, that if they lose the free car parking outside their business, what will that mean for their consumers? So I think helping get that information out to people would be really good.
Definitely, and I think that one's like screaming from the rooftops. Definitely comes up in all of our projects. But please, like, let go of the car. Park. Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I really enjoyed our chat today. I don't know, Kirsten, if you wanted to add any other questions or thoughts, or Rob or anyone.
I would love to, if you have anything else to add that you want more people to know about, or I think how we've kind of looped around back to, we're in a profession that has kind of become increasingly professional, but it's for everyone, and we need everyone to be included and aware of it to do our jobs well. So the disconnect between, or I guess it just demonstrates how much we need to connect with people and bring them up to speed and bring everyone to the same page, so that then we can do our jobs well and continue to create interesting environments that work for people.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah. And look, please do, for anyone who's tuning in, get in touch with your local chamber, or get in touch with us if you have any questions about what we're up to. We're always happy to hear from people.
Yeah, exactly. And if there's any projects on the go that you want to know about, Rob, likewise for yourself, if you want to like end this note on any last words of things people should look into.
Yeah, and well, if you want to, we certainly encourage you to check out CNU's website and check out the Congress for the New Urbanism. It's for really for anybody. It can be although there's a lot of members who are architects and planners and developers and public officials, but also there's activists in the organization and people who are interested in sort of changing the built environment, making their communities better. I'd encourage you to check out CNU and some of the allied organizations that are working on these important issues.
Great. Brilliant. Thanks so much, guys. It was really, really nice to have you, and best of luck with everything, and enjoy your Christmas. It's coming up.
Happy Christmas. Yeah. And have a great day, Kirsten and Rob. the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, bye.
It was great. Thank you.
Cheers.